Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Neil Denari. I'm a professor of architecture at the Department of Architecture and Urban Design. I'm a tenured professor, former interim chair, and I've been teaching at the school since 2002. Welcome to everyone. If you're on the West Coast, good morning. Elsewhere, good afternoon. And I'm going to be going through a somewhat cursory, but hopefully clear overview of the M.Arch.I program, focusing primarily on the design studios, and with a little bit of a preamble into the city of Los Angeles to start. Great. So Los Angeles is about 17 million people at this point. That's the size of the entire nation of the Netherlands. So we start to think about Los Angeles as having a kind of scale and status in the world, and especially when we think about it in relation to California. This state and this city now operate on a very, very clearly world city global scale. The GDP of California, if it were treated as a country, would be ranked 5th in the world, and most of that is driven by the West Coast and in particular Los Angeles. So the scope and scale of the city is something that I think is not a small point about what does it mean to study in UCLA. UCLA is nearly 100 years old. Its centennial will be next year. It's not the oldest city in California, but it is certainly now the #1 ranked public university in the country. We have a 60,000 person community here, 40,000 students. We have MacArthur Prize winners, Nobel Prize winners, famous jazz musicians, etc., all working in the context of a public school, which I think is very important for us also to think about this as a research institute that serves the public, and in particular, the people of California. Zooming in a little closer into our campus, and our building is Perloff Hall. Part of the North Campus of the UCLA campus, where the arts are primarily housed. This building is from the late 1940s, and it's a historic building, actually, in a historic district within the campus. Here you see a party after Rumble reviews that mark the calendar, the beginning of the year and the end of the year. We have a lot of, I think, good social kind of conditions in the school that promote the idea of a collaborative world of study, a collaborative world of understanding how we can work on problems that we face both in the city and also globally. The school is home to the Center for Art and Performance and the Hammer Museum and Fowler Museums, and those are very important cultural institutions that are part of our School of the Arts and Architecture, of which we're one department. Our Ideas campus houses the M.Arch.I program, the post-professional degree program. In this image, that's our former chair, Hitoshi Abe, who served from 2007 to 2016 in the capacity of chair. He's an architect from Sendai in Japan. This is what we call a kind of research skunkworks project that's located off campus in Culver City in a warehouse where we do a lot of, I want to say literally, given this image, blue sky thinking about technology, communications, sustainability, urbanism, and automation and transportation. I'd like to spend a few minutes and show a few images of our faculty. Our faculty is regarded, I think, generally as perhaps the most formidable, I should say, design faculty in the United States, ranging across 3 and 4 generations. Tom Main is the principal of Morphosis. This is an image of his project on the Sunset Boulevard in Hollywood for Emerson College. It's a satellite campus from the Boston School where they study film writing, directing, and production. And this is a dormitory and a series of classrooms that have become instantly a kind of icon in that part of the city. Professor Greg Lynn is a tenured professor as well. He runs an office called Greg Lynn Form. This is an image of a project that he worked on for Detroit and was presented at the last Venice Biennale with other alumni from UCLA who participated. If you Google Greg, you'll see very quickly that he's one of the most important thinkers and futurists within the realm of architecture and industrial design, and he's focusing quite a bit on new material research, but mostly on how robotics will be shaping architecture space in our future going forward. This is my project that I'm working on in El Paso, Texas. It's for an executive office extension, as well as a public art gallery. You can see the project's fairly ambitious and pretty unusual. We've got clients who are hoping to essentially change the way in which the city of El Paso understands public space. It's a liberal city, and he wants to take that fairly strictly, I think, in terms of having architecture change the way in which people perceive culture apart from architecture as a background sheltering service. Hitoshi Abe is, as I said, a former chair. This is a project that he designed for an economics university in Austria. He's known around the world and has been practicing since 1992 with offices in Sendai and also in Los Angeles. Heather Roberge is our current chair. She's a professor and her office is called Murmur. This is an image of a project called On Point, an exhibition at the Sayre Gallery a couple of years ago, which was I think a dramatic and powerful exploration of the historical aspects of structure and form in the world of the architectural column. Jason Payne is also a tenured professor, and this is an image of a project from the Sayre exhibitions series. This is a project called Raspberry Fields, which was an exploration in the subtle mutations of vernacular form for a house proposed for the landscape in Utah. Professor Dana Acuff is the founder and director of City Lab. City Lab is an important center that's associated with AUD in the School of Arts and Architecture, which focuses primarily on urban issues and urban scale issues, even when they have very small footprints. In this case, this image is of a accessory dwelling that would be prefabricated and installed in backyards as a way to explore the conflation of technology and urbanism coming together and asking questions about how Los Angeles can still continue its identity as a city with autonomy and how can it also become more dense in that particular kind of history. Professor Michael Osmond's recent book is a culmination of his research that he did for his PhD on infrastructure, the drawings of infrastructure and the development of infrastructure in early modern work that essentially is a masterwork of exploring and unpacking our relationship to money, politics, industry, human comfort, and sustainability. And he's one of the foremost leading thinkers in this realm in terms of the history of infrastructure and architecture. Georgina Hitch is a partner in Patterns. She's an adjunct professor here. This is an image of a housing tower in Buenos Aires and her hometown in Buenos Aires. And this is a exploration in, let's say, how to take a standard housing tower and turn it into something which could create a different type of visual and cultural interface in the city, essentially to turn a private building into a kind of public project. Jimenez Lai is a lecturer and an important member of our younger group of faculty. This is a project he completed a year ago, I believe, at Coachella, the well-known music festival I'm sure you're all familiar with. Their cultural program of asking young designers to do pavilions has become well known now. Juana Ix is a partner in Productora. It's a partnership in Mexico City. Juana is originally from Belgium and trained there. And this project is a cultural center, and it was the two opposing triangles on the right is the project we're looking at, and it just won the 2018 Oscar Niemeyer Award. Juana teaches 2/3 of the year here as he commutes back and forth from Mexico City. He's an important link to Pacific Rim thought on historical vernaculars of Mexico, as well as contemporary ideas of the Pacific Rim. Of course, we have a full slate of public programs, and our lecture series is always full of amazing architects, designers, thinkers, politicians who are coming to give talks. And we have a dedicated exhibition program in our gallery, which also includes our year-end show called Rumble. Rumble is relatively unique among all U.S. schools of architecture in that instead of having reviews on successive days, the entire school becomes an exhibition platform, and we have all of the reviews happening on 2 days, and we invite many, many critics to come and look at the work. It's a real exhibition festival as well as an intense discussion of current ideas. So let's turn to the M.Arch.I sequence. Of course, it's 3 years. We're on the quarter system here at UCLA, and there's even more information to all of these courses online that you can examine. Of course, if you've got previous education in architecture, there's possibilities for waiving out of a few courses. We don't have advanced standing. Everybody goes through a 3-year sequence. We believe in that very much as a process here at UCLA. So I'm going to turn to the sequence of design studios, and after which we can go into Q&A online. So our first quarter, the 411 project, whether you've studied architecture or not, we begin with the idea of studying architecture in terms of its formal capacity, its formal basis, and in fact, in formal languages. The studio is always looked at. All of the core studios I'm going to show you are constantly examined for the ways in which the processes, teaching methods, and outcomes can be improved upon. The first few images I'm going to show you were within a kind of trajectory of studios that looked at the Roman and Gothic arch, which is a way to talk about geometry and structure, albeit in this case in antique forms of load-bearing capacities that allow us to understand formal language historically. And we immediately get into speculative aspects of transformation of those geometric ideas, which we see how far we can take these clean historical models and push them through other kinds of design criteria. We're not dealing with program here. We're really dealing with tectonics, geometry, and of course, an introduction into the rigors of architectural drawing, architectural model making, and architectural rendering through software. And this is a real highlight, I think, of our core studio. The next quarter, we get into a larger scale project and program. So we jump scales and we jump levels of complexity. This studio has historically focused its attention on structure. So we go from historical ideas of structure and the transformation of them geometrically back into more proper investigations into structural systems. Given that they're core studios, these are usually 4 groups of 10 or 11 students, making a class of around 44, which is our normal size. So students work independently in studios, but the entire 4 studios are working on the same problem, and yet there are differences and variations within the studio based on certain differences of methodology. So you can see drawing types ranging from, let's say, more austere black and white drawings to these drawings that you see here that work off of a condition of color and material to promote a different and more augmented scenography to the project. And even in this particular case, where structure is more sublimated into a surface system. There's a little bit of landscape design, which is introduced here, but more intensively later on in the core sequence. If you've been tracking or following the rise of illustration culture, not only in architecture, but in every kind of media today, given the image laden world that we live in, aspects of what are contained within certain types of images, vitality, color, associations, and so forth. All of these conversations are beginning within this particular studio as well. So we intentionally put these kinds of images together to move back and forth between what might be seen as more illustrative versus more technical. I think also because the core studios have a broad range of approaches and aesthetic regimes that go into the work. More than anything, though, we're still looking at the ways in which structure and program are rigorously installed and put together. Here's model making, which is using laser cutters, 3D printers, paint, etc., to be able to assemble conceptual ideas at scale, which is also an ongoing process-oriented type of work, which is different than, let's say, maybe some schools where a model is produced at the end and less used as a tool. Here, they're more integrated. This is a fully 3D printed model, which focuses, of course, on geometry, form, and profile. These are mixed-use projects, but with a primary focus on the way in which plan is operating in relation to structural fields. And in this particular project, as opposed to others, you can see also different formal regimes, formal languages working across the project. So gridded fields and boxes, for instance, can contain smooth geometry, or in this case, an almost faceted naturalist approach to geometry. In any case, we are really interested in just teaching the rigors of structure and basic structural understanding through these projects. That leads up to a studio that we call TechCore, which is also a novel studio for American architectural schools in their core sequence. It emerged out of the school's interest in the 2000s after we established our presence within digital fabrication, where our seminars, which were focused on fabrication, lavatories, skateboards, lamps, etc., all made with vacuum forming techniques, thermoforming techniques, milling techniques, etc. And we decided to essentially install that more into the core sequence. These projects that you'll see here are the latest incarnation of 401, which are section-heavy projects. In this case, these are urban infill projects that are constrained in plan, but very promiscuous and liberated, I should say, in section. And it takes further the idea of the program, but really asks the students to work in model form quite a bit and translate that back to very rigorous drawing techniques. So let's say here's a kind of an isomorphic relationship between drawing, color, model making, context, so that we can essentially take TechCore as the conflation of many forms of techniques. And in this particular studio, drawing technology has risen up almost to the same level as model making technology. 413, I'm currently teaching that studio. This is architecture as urban landscape and urban design. It's typically revolving around housing as the primary programmatic material. These images are from a year ago. Our studio this year is on the same site on the Los Angeles River, bounded between the Interstate 5 freeway and the Los Angeles River, and it's a bit of a linchpin site of the potential for transforming the waterfront on the one hand in Los Angeles, but thinking about it in terms of the world of the social rather than the world of the private. So this particular project takes a broken slab building up on columns, working off of modernist precedents, makes an articulated ground plane. The 415 studio is the comprehensive design studio. This is the fifth studio in the sequence. And this project has transformed from the scale of the house, focusing primarily on steel construction, to last year for a mixed-use project in a transitional neighborhood, still with the focus on a comprehensive view of architecture, which means structure, program, envelope, skin, and the metrics of environmental controls and sustainability are embedded within this project. This is what I call the white glove test studio, all happening within 10 weeks, where we have to move from the idea of site planning, drawing on those things that we learned in the previous quarter, into programmatic distribution, things that we learned in the second quarter, and adding structure and detail, as you can see in these images here, where structure becomes a formal language that's incredibly vital, active, open-ended. And this project in particular has its precedence and its roots in 1960s and 70s experimental pavilion architecture, where we imagine many, many programs being supported by a technical scaffolding, shall we say. A different approach to the same site, focusing much, much more on a environmentally driven roof skin, essentially a kind of net or hat that is a device that essentially changes the environment from outside to inside, given the specifics of Los Angeles's temperate environment. So you can see the roof is a shading device. It's also a device for thermal cooling and capturing breezes. while the towers are also have a series of permeable envelopes on them. So these axonometrics, which show all the elements of construction, from masonry construction, concrete, lightweight steel and metal framing, and composite materials around the perimeter. We get pretty far within this project in 10 weeks. To conclude the core program, the major building design studio is the sixth in the core sequence, and it essentially returns finally in a deeper examination to an institutional program. And over the last couple of years, we've worked on the project of the fire station with a site in East Los Angeles. So the fire station as a known building type is something that, of course, we can all understand and relate to, even if we don't know how they work technically. And those technical demands, from the housing and the ergonomics of movement of the firefighter within the building, the scale, size, and turning radius of the truck, and also programmatically in this particular instance, trying to think about the fire station as a potential public building with public amenities, teaching elements, landscape that could invite the public to see this type of urban infrastructure differently. And I think it also takes on the history of the fire station as a building that's on the one hand quotidian and in many cases very prosaic, but fire stations have also been projects of great interest for architects over the years as well. So the expression of the fire station is, let's say, under examination as much as its functionality is here. This is a very elaborate laser cut model of this gridded field. Here's a project plan which takes turning radius and actually moves that even further into a formal language of radiused perimeters and conditions as well. We like to think that there's an open approach to, let's say, what does it mean to solve architecture functionally? And I wouldn't say that the school is dogmatic at all at the level of how it treats function. Function has its own discipline, but I think the school, being what it is as an experimental project, has to have the formal project, let's say, of interest along with the way in which the project works from a standard approach. A large cubic volume, Booleaned at the bottom and on the top. These are a whole series of models that this particular student went through. This is a fantastic array of models. We push students to work in multiple iterations to be able to use their own work as a context for making decisions about how to go forward, rather than strictly nurturing an intuitive idea. And so this is the outcome of that incredible process. Different plan ideas, of course, can come out of it based on the way in which the fire trucks move through the site, and different expressions, different drawing methods, different evocation of feelings of what the institutional building is. This being something more like a large house, challenging the identity of what the fire station is. So we get to advanced topics in the third year. These are 1/4 studios, and I'll show you a few images from the past few years. Our faculty are both senior faculty and junior faculty are given the opportunity to teach these studios. This is Georgina Hitch. For a resort in Southeast Asia. She's looking at modularity in particular, and the idea of repetition and difference within a field. Also in her studios, focusing quite a bit on texture mapping and the ways in which texture mapping produces an evocation of, let's say, earthenness, or connected to the ground and connected to nature, as opposed to the plastic, abstract way to, make drawings. So the idea of the real being subjected to something very uncanny, I think, is going on here with these particular drawings. Now, a few years, well, a couple of years before that, this was a studio taught by Georgina on the idea of the mute icon. So you see drawings of a very large concert hall against a white background to take it out of a certain kind of known context, and essentially pursuing texture mapping in high relief and high three-dimensionality as it would permeate the entire project. So this project explores formal language and autonomy within architecture, previous projects about site and landscape. A studio by Juana Ix that he called the Very Long Building Studio, working on linear typologies in Mexico City, which you may or may not know is essentially an 25 million people built city on a lake. And so this project exploits the reality and the history of that type of landscape. Juana also did projects that look at different typologies. And this is the long building connecting to the idea of the pavilion building. And he's also done studios that look at the hillside and also in Mexico City. So his particular frame of reference for his own office Productura is based on strong ideas of typology, as well as the way in which the landscape drives typologies. You've got a cliff or a hillside that drives the logic of architectural typology. If you've got a super big program in a big horizontal landscape, that'll produce the long linear building. These are images of his hillside housing projects, which of course engage in modularity. The research studio is a year-long studio. It is also unique among US schools. In the fall and winter quarters, you have a seminar with your design faculty that you select in the lottery of the beginning of the year, and it culminates in a 10-week design studio in the spring. Some examples of that were from Heather Roberge's studio, which, as you might remember from her installation at SciArc, which was focused on the column, she spent a year looking at the question of the column, its language, and its capabilities. So here, ideas about the column from a point to a room, using drawing to produce gradient fields and changes within the grid. This focusing on corners and cruciforms, which are, of course, are part of the modernist legacy of column making. Axonometric drawings become, let's say, very useful and very instrumental in the studio, and model making in photography, which augments those types of drawings. More examples of that particular project, which were based on repetition within a field. Worm's eye axonometrics that also dramatize footprint and grid, as well as unfolded and related drawings of interior elevations. These are images of a studio that I taught in 2015, 2016, called Tower Complex, called Chromatopia. And these were 100-meter towers for Shanghai. My students and I went to Shanghai and did field work and research, and came to the conclusion that most of the city is made up of very drab, boring 100-meter towers, or very, very tall exhibitionist type towers in the Pudong. We decided to put those two things together to make projects that were not super tall or ambitious toward that, but have heterogeneous programs. My focus on drawing in this particular studio was very much related more to the graphic project using Illustrator, hard shadows, let's say different ways in which windows become patterns, chromatic ranges were used here. And Tower Complex is a recent book that was published a year ago that was on projects for, in this particular case, one very tall tower in Los Angeles. And it was multiple students designing multiple pieces for that tower. This is back to Autopia. This is an installation of Rumble. Here you can see the array of drawings from all the students in their multiple towers that they designed. Each student designed 3 towers within 10 weeks. It was an insane amount of production that they all enjoyed quite a bit. And there's the book that we published. I'm personally interested in doing publications, and I think it's a growing ambition also for other faculty within the department. This is Heather Roberge's studio from last year, and it was also a project that is about something we all should be thinking about, which is water. Water as a precious research. We like to say that water is the new oil, and that going forward, its conservation and use will be as important as anything. This is a school, and thinking about how the program of the school can be connected to water management, both hydrologically, infrastructurally, and scenographically. Exploded axonometrics. And you can see elaborate roof geometry here, which is about capturing that water. This is a studio taught by Hitoshi Abe, and it is a study now ongoing for the last 2 years on the future of work, and in particular, the way in which work has taken on aspects of living, giving architecture a kind of new set of ambitions to think about what does it mean to build spaces that are transformable, that are flexible, thinking about offices like condominiums that can be bought and sold and change hands, temporality, the role of furniture, et cetera, and essentially the building as a kind of infrastructural project. This is from the same studio, and this is a commercial art gallery, which is merged with the idea of a museum. So exhibition and installation in the commercial sense being connected to the identity of the city museum, also located in Los Angeles. These are images of a studio I taught last year. It was on the Santa Monica Airport site. That's the site plan on the right, a very large a site that will become, let's say, a park, we believe, in 2027, when all the airport activities are shut down. This is on the west side of Los Angeles, and so I propose to create with the students a low-rise housing world in a forest. And it's not autumn in, autumn doesn't look like this in Los Angeles, but we used color and rendering as a way to also heighten the graphic aspect of the landscape, and to essentially move away from conventional modes of representation of that landscape. Each student developed a pavilion. This is a inflatable pavilion, actually, or I should say a membrane pavilion on a steel skin that houses music and is also a kind of ventilator for the site. I think that gives us a little bit of an overview, and please write in to ask questions. Our student affairs officers are here to answer more specific questions on the techniques and processes of applying. I can help answer questions further about curricula, about the focus and interest of UCLA and things that may be related to teaching. And so I'll be able to read your questions on my screen, and I can answer back. Let's see, we've got a few other things while we're waiting for that. Our deadline for applying is December the 15th for the M.Arch.I program. There's lots of information currently on the website. The website will be relaunched, and we've got a bit of a new brand for, well, I should say a new brand for the department, which will be coming out in the first quarter of the winter quarter. Our open house for accepted students is in the end of the winter quarter, which is near the end of March. So I'll get to some of the questions. So first one is, how much access do M.Arch.I students have to the fabrication facilities and the machines? Do we hand off files, or are we just using the tech ourselves? You've got full access to our shop here, and it's always encouraged. If even studios and seminars aren't asking for particular types of production in the lab, students are always availing themselves of it, and almost everyone becomes fairly expert at it. You don't hand off files. You are trained in how to use all of the machines, from 3D printers, both SLA printers, powder printers, laser cutters, and there's even access to the robots at the M.Arch.II Super Studio. Another question is, does the university offer any courses for various certifications like green roofs, passive house? No, we don't offer certification. A lot of our students do get LEED certified, which is something that they can do on their own. We explore that within various studios and also our environmental control classes, but we don't offer any other type of certification for that. Let's see, I touched on ideas and its cross-discipline incubation, and to what extent can M.Arch.I students get involved. Every M.Arch.I student is eligible for consideration for the M.Arch.II program in their third year. So should you be interested in any of the studios, generally there are 4 of them, you can spend your entire third year in that studio. You do have to submit a portfolio and apply. Just a handful of students go that route every year. And so it's an incredible option, though, however, if you'd like to focus on something in particular at ideas. There's also ways to intersect in a few seminars that are taught through that curriculum as well. Is there an M.Arch.II program for students who come from an accredited undergraduate architecture degree program? No, there's not. We have to keep our focus on students who have a major diploma or an NAB accredited degree, depending on where you're from. There's no advanced standing for the M.Arch.I program. All the students, okay, yeah. So non-design background students versus architecture undergrad students, what suggestions do you have in approach to the portfolio and preparation for classes? If you're asking from the non-background side of things, portfolio, I'll just touch on it very quickly. Put in only your best work. Don't fill it with work just to fill it up. Be very simple graphically. All of your reproductions, whether they're paintings or drawings, need to be top quality. We need to know that you're serious and have curated your work and spent the time to put it together. So that's important. Preparing for classes prior to, let's say, the Jumpstart program, which is the summer program that we have every summer, you can also take classes at local junior colleges, either in terms of computer software. And if you're interested in that, we can give you a list of the software that we use typically here. Do any of the studios have group final projects? Yes, the TechCore, I failed to mention that. The TechCore, which is the third quarter, that's done in groups of 2 and 3 students because of the scale and complexity of it. So, in fact, one of the core studios is a group project. And from time to time in the advanced topic studios, group projects are done as final projects. In my research studio, for the first 2 quarters, we work in groups. We make master plans, and then each student designs their own project in the spring quarter. So I work as a kind of hybrid.
So we'll wait for more questions.
Okay. That's the... Okay. Happy to answer any questions. I think we've got a little bit of time here. Okay, Janelle is writing in, have you witnessed an intersection of architecture students and students from other departments collaborating on projects, perhaps students from math, dance, etc.? Yes, we have some formal arrangements with students in other departments. One that's been going on for about 4 or 5 years now has been led by Professor Dana Acuff from City Lab. She's been operating with a very generous Mellon Foundation grant, which is the initiative of what they call urban humanities. So generally every year about 30 students, a number of them, about a third I would say, from the AUD collaborate in seminars and research that also includes travel to look at specific conditions in specific cities. Primarily, the research has been focusing on Pacific Rim studios, Pacific Rim cities. My studio in Shanghai was related to the Urban Humanities Initiative, and that grant funded our travel. But what was great is we get to work with students in languages and history and just all across the humanities. I should also say that there is a course in the School of the Arts and Architecture. I forget the number. What is the number? Like Art 100, or it's a course that students can work with other students across the departments, and it's given by a faculty member from each department once a year. It rotates to Arts and Architecture 100 course. That's not a studio course, that's more of a seminar. Okay, Alberto, where was I? Any thoughts, Kevin writes, any thoughts on the mix of preparation for professional practice versus theory? Does AUD attempt to balance? I think balance is probably a good word. You're familiar with all the schools, or becoming familiar with many schools in the United States, and I do believe that there has been a tendency for schools to bifurcate either into a heavy conceptual framework of teaching and work, which might lead toward the idea of teaching students to become teachers or teaching students to become, let's say, theorists, versus schools that are focused very, very much on hewing or adhering to a strict professional idea of what architecture is. I believe that AUD bridges the conceptual and the technical better than any school. I've been involved in a lot of schools, and that is very palpable here. I try to personally make that a very important aspect of my own teaching, where we push everything to the limit, but we also talk about application, its relationship to existing paradigms, and in many respects, giving students school tool sets that, whether it's about design thinking and design intelligence, should you want to go into more speculative type of practices, versus skill sets that are, should I say, highly coveted by employers. I run a 20-person office, so I also understand the ways in which education for recent graduates play out in the professional landscape. That was, I think I answered that one. Yeah. So Mark asked, what is the balance between computer modeling and actual making, whether that is design build projects, physical models, or hand drawing? Are there any study abroad or externship opportunities? The school is focused primarily on digital tools. It's not a school that has promoted drawing by hand as an initial foray into teaching architecture. What one's background with that is quite often quite extensive, as everybody who's interested in the field generally has some relationship maybe to drawing or painting or physical expression, perhaps sculpture, model making, etc. The model making that goes on here takes advantage of all the tools that we have in the fabrication lab. And I think the visual culture of the school is connected to regimes of making that are both pre-digital and post-digital in terms of their histories. Study abroad, we don't have a formal study abroad program. We have travel within a number of studios that generally is a week to 10 days. Students are, I believe, in the countryside of France as we speak, as well as in Asia. Externship opportunities are, we have portfolio, well, we have a day in which offices do come to the school and look at the portfolios of students. We have both a formal and informal network of summer internships. All of our faculty generally employ either one or more students during the summer. Janelle is asking, are there any courses for M.Arch.I students that discuss the inherent bias that designers bring to projects and how to use that bias appropriately. That's I think an issue that we discuss instinctively and inherently in our design curriculum. And there's many ways in which one could, let's say, unfold or interpret the issue of bias, from the negative aspects of it culturally on the one hand, to the ideas that bias in the field of architecture and the arts, which is essentially about preferring one way of working versus another way of working, is essentially the way in which people produce an identity to their work. And that's important to us, yet the idea of diversity within, let's say, the studios, within the faculty, is also very, very obvious. But I believe that your question is about bias appropriately across many ways in which bias could be thought through. And it's a topic that filters through the school very openly and very optimistically and very often. Do you know what percentage of students obtain jobs in architecture right after graduation? Also, does the school help students get placed for jobs? I think the first question is, I don't know the percentages. They're shifting in many ways all the time. I can go back to the thought that the school has a broad idea about the possibility of what practice is, which means that whether you go into traditional architectural offices, whether large offices, let's say like Gensler, and which employ many of our students, or my office, for instance, which is 20 people, a smaller office, and I employ, I believe, 6 UCLA graduates and a number who are my former students. There's a broad range of scales and types of offices that our students go into. I don't know the numbers of late as to whether students are, let's say, pursuing related fields such as digital design, animation, film, but there are always, every year, students, I think, that migrate, even if it's one, into related territories. One of our best graduates who went to GSD and was a former summer intern of mine, he's now a creative officer for WeWork, and doing incredibly well and taking his design skills into that world. I believe he's working with Bjarke Ingels, who's doing work with them. So there's many avenues, many stories, many trajectories, and I think it really has to do with what you as a student begin to either intuitively or more consciously feel like what pathway you should take after school. I think we informally help students in finding jobs. My students, I'm always available for them to list me as references and to, when needed, write letters of recommendation to help them find the best job they can. Another question is, do M.Arch.I students have access to a 6-axis robot arm? What if we worked with a professor who is using one in his or her research? Yes, the answer is yes, especially if you were to choose to go to the Super Studio Ideas campus in your 3rd year. While not every faculty member in that particular program is focused centrally on the use of robotic technology, at least half of them are, as well as being able to have access through joining other seminars. The work with a professor who's using in his research would be really through the studio and seminar based work. Our professors aren't allowed or given access to use these tools for their own purposes. We keep a clear division between what faculty members do for their own personal research that they may be funded by. We're a state university and we have to operate that way. But needless to say, there's a lot of mixing of agendas and intent of one's, let's say, private research. That's the case with my office in terms of what ideas and methods we bring to teaching. Another question is, how much freedom is there in the curriculum for students to develop their own design philosophy? That's not about designing a curriculum. If one is asking about designing a curriculum, there's only minor ways to tweak the curriculum beyond what it is and beyond being able to choose electives. You can choose to work, I think, on a, 2 hours with a course with an independent study. Would be a 2-hour course, independent study seminar that's available to all students. You have to write a proposal for that and work with a particular professor. But students developing their own design philosophy is a great question. And I think in terms of the core program, we try to give the students technical tools that allow them to make decisions within that particular 2-year sequence to develop ideas and inclinations, whether it's stylistic things or particular ways to draw, and possibly even design methodology. There is diversity within that particular realm. Once one gets into the 3rd year, and this is the case with most schools, faculty come with their project, they come with their agenda, and I can speak for myself, I come with design methodologies, I come with ways of drawing, not that they're figured out, but that they have a particular ambition and a way in which to work on that problem. Those things range differently across all faculty members. For us at UCLA, the idea of freedom and the idea of laissez-faire design are 2 different things. I think there's a lot of freedom to choose different agendas at the school, but the school doesn't certainly let teach from a laissez-faire idea that what students do on their own is then how they define themselves. That wouldn't be what we thought would be strong teaching. I hope I've answered your question with some nuance, but precise enough.
Last one. How is merit aid?
What's that? Where's that? I
I
think there's one last question we can get to. Where's that?
How is merit aid determined? How is merit aid determined?
I see. Mark has the last part, which is how is merit aid determined? What would that, I mean, what is he asking?
I mean, it's basically just
In terms of scholarships?
Recruitment fellowships.
Okay.
Are determined based on the strict
If your question is about upon application, how do we determine whether there are fellowships or scholarships given to entering students? The application process and the analysis of all the students is a long and intense and laborious but incredibly enjoyable process for all of us on the committee looking at M.Arch.I dossiers. We of course have different components to look at, grades and GRE letters, self-statement, portfolio. They're all incredibly important, and it doesn't matter whether you studied architecture in undergrad or not. The way in which you present yourself and your ideas, of course, is quite important. In terms of portfolio, which I don't think that if I said it was the most important, or let's say the central element of how we make some determinations for merit, I think I wouldn't be completely honest, and I believe that's the case with most schools. So going back to how you present your work in a really clear fashion and being very forthright about what you've done and how you worked on that in terms of process and outcome is obviously important. We're looking for the highest level of craft you can give to your work and your portfolio. It sends messages about what we could potentially expect from you in terms of your commitment to what is really a very technical and detail-oriented, both in terms of thought and in image-making field. And we discuss all the portfolios as a group and look through things very, very closely. So it's not any different, I think, than any other school in terms of that. For ongoing students, we have scholarships ranging from our Perloff scholarship on down to other named scholarships that are also merit-based. In some cases, they have specific conditions attached to them. And I think the work that we see from ongoing students has the same set of criteria from entering students, which is the depth of your research, the level of craft and precision in your work, the way in which you've culturally and verbally and intellectually engaged in the community. All of those things are thought through and analyzed. Architecture is not an empirical discipline, and there's judgment, and we just try to take all of that in and judge the best we can with that. The main thing is to put your best foot forward. I think if there are no more questions, we speaking on behalf of everyone in the room here and UCLA and the department, I want to thank you all for taking the time today to get online with us. And there's lots of resources here for you to follow up if you've got more questions. And we look forward to your applications in December. And more importantly, we hope to see you in September next year. Thank you so much.